Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome on behalf of Brain Injury SA and on behalf of our presenting partner, the Lifetime Support Authority. I would firstly like to acknowledge this land that we meet on today as the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. Before I go on to introduce our two guest speakers, I'd like to say a special thank you to those that have made this event possible, which of course includes our wonderful and dedicated staff, the team at Yellowwig, and importantly, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to the Lifetime Support Authority, who I've mentioned. Without their support and their generosity, this event would not have evolved to be what it is today. I'd like to thank their new acting CEO, Tamara Tomic, and of course their amazing team. So this morning I take the pleasure to introduce two certified and internationally renowned Feldenkrais practitioners, both Jane Searle and Margaret Mayo. Margaret has worked both nationally and internationally and is a certified practitioner with more than 30 years of expertise behind her. And Jane Searle is also a Feldenkrais practitioner and a neurological physiotherapist. Both practitioners have strong backgrounds in working in rehabilitation settings. We are very excited to hear about how both practitioners apply the Feldenkrais Method to assist people with ABI to learn to move more efficiently, comfortably and intelligently. So please join me in welcoming both Margaret, who will talk first, and then that'll be followed by Jane. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. Is that all right with the volume? Perfect, good. And we're really thrilled to be here to present our method to you all. Okay, so I'll start. Now wait a minute, is there a little thing working? This little thing. Oh, right, so here we are. Okay, now please don't worry too much, don't try and take notes, because if you really want these headings, I'm very happy to send them to you on the email and we can find that out. Anyway, there are two main sections of the Feldenkrais method. There is awareness through movement classes where groups meet, and there are many, many lessons. And then there's the one-on-one, which is the individual lesson, which is called functional integration. Just to know that. So with the awareness through movement, each member of the group works at their own pace. Okay, and that all ages attend the same classes. So for example, in my class, I have 20-year-olds and 90-year-olds. Because the instructions are such, which you will experience with Jane later, that you just do what you can do. There's no outside goal that we're aiming for. It is to process for yourself and to do whatever it is that's comfortable for you in a way that you can learn. So that's what's in, and then all ages. And participants are also encouraged to take care of themselves, meaning there's no sort of, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. There's no goal out there. It is, how can I manage to do a movement? Whereas the functional integration, they are individual lessons designed to answer the client's question. And their questions can be all sorts of things. And the most important thing for the practitioner is to listen. Not to have a preconceived idea that this person in front of us needs something that's not relevant maybe to that person. And that person can articulate what they would like to work with, and of course that makes them more motivated. And they're very much part of the process. Touch and verbal guidance, that's obvious. The client always remains clothed, there's no stripping off. And really the thinking behind that is that we are who we are in our clothes. Most of us don't feel too comfortable naked. Maybe you do, maybe you all love it, but you know, most of us like to be clothed. And so that's the thinking behind that. And then lessons can be conducted in any position that the client finds comfortable, any starting position. Moshe Feldenkrais lived from 1904 to 1984. At the age of 14, he walked from Central Europe to Palestine. Took him 3 months. He set off by himself and gathered people around him as he continued. Very interesting. So he did have something quite special about him. I'm loath to use the word charisma, but there is something very special. There was. He was educated in Palestine. He was an engineer, and I think this is important because he was interested in structure, the structure of the human body, the structure of the person, and how that structure informs function. Now, our structure is our skeleton. And I think this is one of the very big points of departure of the Feldenkrais method to other modalities. It really is very important to help people understand what is their structure, where is their skeleton, how does it support them. Because the amazing thing is, neurologically, everything else jumps into place if you can find your feet. So if you're someone who can't put your feet to the floor, it's very difficult to organise everything on top, the building blocks on top. Anyway, I nearly started on my pet thing of nursing homes, not letting people stand, but I just kept away from it. It was close. Okay. Also, Feldenkrais had a black belt in judo, and many of his lessons were informed by the martial arts. He was a professional soccer player, had a bad knee, and in fact that was one of the stimuluses for this method. He was offered an operation in the early 40s and was told he had a 50% chance of ending up in a wheelchair. Or he could go to bed for 6 months. We're talking 40s, right? Not these days when you walk back from the operating theatre. But what is interesting is that such a physical man he wasn't going to take, he was a scientist, he wasn't going to take 50% odds. That was no good. So he took to his bed and was told not to move his knee. These days we would never say that either, but it's an interesting thing. So he was lying there and he thought, well, I can't lie here for 6 months doing nothing. So he started to move his pelvis. And as he moved his pelvis, he found he could move the top of him, and then gradually, he found he could stand by the edge of the bed without moving his knee. And again, that's a very important part of our method, which is if you can organise this big part of our torso, then your limbs again have got a chance to organise themselves. And you know, that's got a lot in common with, for those of you who know, with the Bobath method and all sorts of things that were coming out of Central Europe in the 30s and 40s. Okay, so that's just work. Anyway, right. He worked with the Curies in Paris. He was right there at that forefront. And he worked with the British in World War II. But what's interesting about that is that he started with many of the sort of admirals and whoever in the British forces. When they got neck pain or back pain, he worked with them and helped them, although that wasn't his job. So, you know, he had this real passion for human development, for human, I thought of the word and I've forgotten it. Anyway, it'll come. Human potential. That's what his passion was. For people to reach their potential, whatever that is. And I think that's really important for us to think about that today. Okay. Now, another big thing is about our belief systems and that they trap us in our habitual behaviour. So if we believe we can't do something, guess what? No doubt about it. You won't do it. So we need to expand our beliefs in ourselves. So that's that. And it encourages curiosity and exploration, and the learning is experiential, which you will find with Jane. Okay, I've talked about structure. Skeleton is our structure, and how, if we move our shoulder forwards, if we don't move here and we move our shoulder, what happens? If we move our chest and move our arm forwards, what is the difference? How does it feel? And of course, everything else is going along through here. So if all this is rigid, not a lot happening. But if we can find those connections through our torso, we become much more functional. And of course, the other big thing, as we all know, is to be able to act in our environment. It's got to be relevant to what's happening around us. So the movement is a vehicle for this method, and there's a lot of concern with intention. Do you intend to punch someone in the snoot? Or, you know, it's very different movement if I want to punch or if I'm just pushing. And so to have that functional component makes a very big difference. So that's the intention, to attend to what's happening. To have efficiency is slowness, smooth and small. To really cut out the excessive movements. So it's about using all of ourselves. And using all of ourselves is thinking, feeling, sensing, and acting in the world. And I talked this briefly, but there is Feldenkrais working with a client on a bed, and it's a human-to-human interaction, and it's about listening. And you can listen with your hands. And again, I talked about potential, learning to learn. It's experiential. What your experience is very different from someone else's experience. And it's not for us to judge, it's to acknowledge the experience. So it's exploratory, curious, and creative. Which is why there aren't any huge surveys about the efficacy of the Feldenkrais method. There are so many variables, there's so much going on. Good luck, is all I can say. Okay, so the method is about process. You have a clear intention. You can make distinctions through attention. It is non-goal orientated. And of course, this is where we come a bit unstuck in conventional arenas. You know, we can find a little goal of something, but really it is about the process. One's habits can become confronted. And of course, habits can also be good things, as we all know. You can't drive a car without having habits. But some of us get into a few cranky things as well. And we all have these habits that are really not terribly good. Right. And then in the method, we constrain movements that are habitual. We constrain ways of doing things to open up a new way for the system of that person to find a new way of acting in the world. Right. And we use mental practice, imagery, fabulous stuff, which I'm sure you all know about, and metaphor. Now, the nervous system is plastic. Now, this is, of course, the latest buzzword, neuroplasticity, right? And 50 years ago, people felt that all researchers, that everything was hardwired, and what you had is what you got. And this is clearly not the case. And you would have all had experiences of this, that things can change, people organise themselves in a different way. But I do want to say we all have neuroplasticity. We couldn't act in the world if we didn't. We all have to adapt to new situations all the time. So on some level, this neuroplasticity is not really all that new. It's just that it has been fostered recently, and the Norman Deutsch book has done a great deal for the Feldenkrais Method because there are 2 chapters talking about it. And it is in that context of neuroplasticity. But really just to say, we've all got it. Otherwise we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be able to operate. But there is potential for people with injury to in fact change the way their brains are wired. But I would also like to say it takes a lot of effort, a lot of practice, and a lot of dedication. And sometimes people just want to get on with their lives. They don't want to have that fixed. So I'm a great believer in people living and for me to help them find a way to live more easily. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if you get obsessed with some of these things, they can get in the way from having a nice time. And that's what I'm pretty keen on. Now, our breathing patterns reflect the state of our system. And very often, to teach someone to breathe in a slightly different way can help their entire system calm down and enable it to move more efficiently. And of course, efficient movement of the skeleton through the environment. So it's process learning versus goal-orientated learning. You know, and it is a bit tricky, as I alluded to before. You know, there's nothing wrong with the odd goal, but it's the process that'll get you through. So again, it's how we attend to ourselves in our environment. You can have foreground attention, peripheral attention. I'm not attending over here so well. I'm orientated here, and I need to be here to acknowledge this side of the room. So there's that, and to become aware of our habits. And if you see that young woman sitting there, short back of her neck, shoulders up to her ears, funny thing about that, she's got a bit of a headache and a bit of a neck ache. Okay, so, you know, and with brain injury, there are all sorts of things. As you all know, you can sit on one side of your chair, you can, you know, have one leg out all the time, and these become habits that are not necessarily need to be kept hold of. Okay, the senses are very important. These are big words, don't worry too much about them, but just to say the input that comes in all over us, from feet to the top of our head, affects how we act, how we move. So the input is very, very important. And with the quality of movement, which you'll experience with Jane, am I going too long? No. Which you'll experience, you'll really find that these points of decreased effort, decreased resistance, reversibility, and being able to breathe appropriately for what you're trying to do. Oh, is that it? No. Oh. So again, we involve all of ourselves. We self-reference through the sensory motor system, and we make distinctions, distributing the movement through ourselves, and every movement has timing, orientation, and manipulation. Now, by attending to the sensory input, so by attending to what's coming in, and for some of you, you'll know you've got the experience of people who don't like too much light, don't like too much noise, don't like rough things on their skin. So all those things make a difference. They influence the quality of our motor output. With our ability, as we develop this ability to sense more, we can feed forward richer detail into our motor plans for future movement. It just means it expands our palette. It expands our experience if we take notice of this. And you know, in our society, we haven't got very many words for sensing, feeling. Other societies have a larger repertoire of words to acknowledge this input that's coming into us. So it's very, very important. And there he is.
So that's the Israeli.
Oh, is that the Israeli Prime Minister? So that's Ben-Gurion, who Feldenkrais taught to stand on his head. 77. Pretty amazing. Okay. And there we go. So that's a little encapsulated story. And here's Jane. Thank you. Do you want to go back to the beginning? Oh yeah, here we are. We're back at the beginning. Perfect.
It's not on the screen though. Actually, probably be better if the screen's off, maybe. So, I'm going to give you a concrete example of this process that Margaret was talking about. Now, we do have extra chairs, so if you wanted to just move and use some extra chairs, so you've got a little bit of space around you, that might be helpful. Or you can just stay in your chair. But I'm going to lead you through an awareness through movement lesson, so we're going to actually do some movement. Okay. No. Just get my water handy in case I need it while people get organised. Okay, so if you've got glasses on, you might like to take them to the side. That's okay, because it's more about sensing how you're moving. So without changing anything, you can just take a moment to notice your contact on the chair. So you may like to close your eyes if that's easier, if you feel comfortable having your eyes closed. But just take a moment to sense how much of you is in contact with the chair. How much of your back is sitting on the chair? How much of your thighs are supported? So if you bring your attention to your left thigh, how much contact does your left thigh have on the chair? How much contact does your right thigh have on the chair? How much of your thighs aren't in contact with the chair? Take a moment to sense your feet. Are both feet on the floor? Do you have more weight through the ball of your feet? Are your heels in contact with the floor? Or maybe you've got one leg crossed, so maybe one foot's in the air. And so you're not changing anything, you're just taking a moment to observe how are you organised in your chair right now. So take a moment to sense the shape of your back. So can you sense the shape of your lower back? The shape of your middle back? And then you can bring your attention to how you're carrying your head. So is your head directly over your pelvis, or maybe it's more over your left hip or your right hip? How are you stacked? What's the relationship of your head and your pelvis like? Okay. And then leave that, and can you come to the front of your chair so that your back's not supported? So you're sitting on the front of your chair. And once again, if it feels comfortable for you, have your eyes closed. And just take a moment to sense how you're sitting now. So do you have more weight under your left hip? Or under your right hip? Is there a different sense of contact through your feet now that you've brought your pelvis forward? And how have you placed your feet? What's the relationship of your feet with your knees? So are your feet forward of your knees? Are they behind your knees? And yet to begin with, keep your eyes closed and see if you can sense, see if you can develop an internal sense of what it is that you're doing. But yeah, absolutely, go ahead and you can have a little peek and just see, are you doing what you think you're doing, and how congruent with what you feel you're doing is with what you're actually doing. Do you know which direction your toes are pointing? Or maybe one foot's a little further out to the side. So if someone was going to come and sit on your knee, would you change where you've placed your feet? So imagine that someone's going to come and sit on your knee and say, would you change where you've placed your feet? And so essentially, if our lower leg is more vertical and our feet are more underneath our knees, then we're going to be able to use our skeleton more. We'll be able to require less muscle activity. Okay. And then once again, just take a moment to sense, how are you stacked? So bring your attention to your pelvis. And then bring your attention to your chest. And so just notice, is your chest directly above your pelvis? Is it off to the left, to the right? Maybe it's a little forward or behind. And then take a moment to sense your head. So how are you carrying your head? And once again, how stacked are you? Is your head directly over your chest, which is over your pelvis? Or maybe your head's a little forward of your chest? or maybe to the left or to the right. You don't change anything, you're just observing. What's wonderful about this work is there's no right or wrong, it's just developing that ability to sense what it is that you're doing. Okay. And then as much as you can without interrupting your breathing, can you just take a moment to sense how your breath moves you? So where do you feel the movement of your breath? So do you sense movement in your upper chest? Maybe in your abdomen? Can you sense any movement at the lower ribs at the front? Can you sense any movement of the ribs at the back, the ribs below your shoulder blades? Can you sense yourself moving in a backwards direction or not? And how about to the sides? Can you sense your ribs moving towards your arms or not? Okay. And then please place your hands on your knees. Yep. And have your feet flat and some space between your feet. So your feet are sort of shoulder width apart. And very slowly, very gently, can you begin to explore arching your lower back? So just a very small movement. So you're just exploring the very beginning of the action. So you're just noticing, how do you initiate arching your back? A very small movement. And you're moving in a way that doesn't interrupt your breathing. Yeah? So notice, are you holding your breath? If you're holding your breath, then you're already doing too much. So you're going to move in a way that your breathing can remain uninterrupted. Okay, so you're gently, many times exploring, initiating rolling, arching the lower part of your back so that your belly comes forward a little bit, and you might roll a little towards your pubic bone. Yep. But you're not going as far as you can go, you're just staying at the very beginning of that action. And can you sense how the rest of you responds? So what do you do with your head? So as you're slowly arching the lowermost part of your spine, does your head stay still? Does your head move backwards? Does your head move forwards? Can you sense what your head is doing? And how do your shoulders respond? Do your shoulders move backwards? So many times, just very slowly, gently. And can you sense what part of you gets engaged through your back? And is this the same place that if you were to sit for a long time that you'd get tired? Okay. And now you're going to continue just gently arching the lower part of your back. But this time, can you arch in a way that your whole spine moves forward, so that your back and your shoulders don't move backwards, that everything comes forward. So just very slowly, gently begin to explore, how do you organise yourself so that your whole spine moves forward. And so can you invite the muscles at the back of your neck and the muscles around your shoulders to be more quiet, so that you're really only engaging the muscles at the lowermost point of your spine. Okay. We'll just pause for a moment. Have a pause. So the rests are not so much about having a physical rest, they're more about having a rest for your attention. Okay. And then when you're ready, please come back to that same position. So your heels are flat, your hands are on your knees. And once again, slowly, gently begin to Gently arch the lower part of your back. And then this time you can just arch a little bit, and then can you begin to move your whole self to the right and back to the middle. So can you begin to tilt your whole spine? So you could imagine that maybe your spine is a stick or there's a rod. And so very slowly, gently explore tilting a little bit to the right and back to the middle. And can you feel how that increases the weight underneath your right hip? So can you begin to sense that you're pouring weight onto your right hip, and your left hip might, or your left sit bone might come a little away from the chair. And so there's a couple of ways that you might be pouring weight to your right hip. So one could be that you're making a bit of a curve, a C shape with your trunk. So that also can bring weight to your right hip. But what we're exploring at the moment is keeping your spine like a stick, and everything tilts over to the right and then back to the middle. So as much as you can, your spine's not bending. Okay. And the next time you come back to the middle, can you slowly begin to tilt to the left and back to the middle? And just notice, what is it like to tilt to the left? Is it easier going to this side? Is it different? How do you shift weight to your left hip? Can you sense any changes of pressure underneath your feet? And then the next time you come back to the middle, you can continue through, and you can slowly begin to tilt a little left and a little right. So you can have the image of a pendulum, just very slowly. So you're going slow enough that you can really sense how you're using yourself. And you're staying in a range that feels really comfortable. So if you're getting any discomfort, you can do less, make the movement smaller. You can even just imagine the movement. That will use the same part of the brain that does the movement. Okay. And pause. Have a rest for a moment. So when you're doing the movements, you're bringing the smallest amount of effort that you can to the movement. And so your breath can be a good barometer. So if you notice that you're holding your breath, then you might be working too hard. Okay. So coming back with your hands on your knees, your feet flat, gently arch the lower part of your back once again. And then go ahead and tilt your whole spine to the left. And then from the left, can you begin to tilt your whole spine forward and then around to the right and then backwards, so that you're beginning to make a cone shape with your whole spine. Yeah? So go slow enough that you can sense the lumbar part of your spine. And you sense the spine between your shoulder blades. And you sense the spine in your neck. And can you spread your attention to sense your whole spine at the same time, or do you shuttle your attention between these places? How easy or not is it to sense your whole spine? And as you're slowly going around making this cone shape, can you sense what's happening underneath your pelvis? So can you sense how the contact on the chair is changing? Or maybe you can sense a shift, changes of pressure underneath your feet. And what are you doing with the top of your head? So can you sense what the top of your head is doing as you're making this cone shape with your spine? So can you sense that the top of your head is making a circle through space? Yep. So maybe you could imagine that there's a pencil that's coming out the top of your head, and if there was a piece of paper, how circular would that shape be that the pencil's drawing? And it can be small, so keep it small. Okay. And then a few times can you reverse the direction? So can you explore going in the opposite direction? And once again, spreading your attention to sense the length of your spine at the same time that you're tracking what the top of your head is doing through space. Okay, let it go. Have a rest for a moment. Okay. So come back to that position with your hands on your knees and your feet flat. And just gently go back to that first movement of just gently arching the lowermost point of your spine, so that you're moving and you're tilting your whole spine forward. And just notice, is that any different after you've explored doing this cone shape? Has that influenced this original movement in any way? How do you initiate this action now? Is it in the same place? Is there less activity through the back of your neck now? Or maybe it feels the same. Okay, so there are spots where I'm making a bit of short-circuiting. Alright, so then come back to that position with your hands on your knees and gently arch the lower back just a little bit. So you sort of come a little forward onto your pubic bone. And can you begin to make a very small round circle with your nose? So just a very small movement. So maybe you could imagine that there's a little clock, maybe the size of a wristwatch, that's just in front of your nose, and that you're moving the hand of the clock very slowly around the clock face. So you're using your nose to push that hand of the clock. So very slowly and gently. And so we'll go in a clockwise direction. So can you sense, when is your nose to the left? When is your nose to the right? And how easy or not is it to sense this? Okay, so we're going to place 12 o'clock when your nose is a little higher and your chin comes away from your chest. And then 3 o'clock will be when your nose comes to the right. And then as you bring your nose down to 6 o'clock, your chin might get a little closer to your chest. And then your nose will move to the left as it goes to 9 o'clock. And then back up to 12 o'clock. So keep it small so that you're not overworking the muscles at the back of your neck. Yeah, so just keep it in a range that feels really easy and feels really pleasant. And just notice, how do you organise your nose to make a circle? And how easy or not is it to track the path that your nose is taking through space? Okay, so, and is it possible that as you're making a circle with your nose, can you sense what the top of your head is doing? So maybe find a place on the top of your head which feels sort of the highest point, and just follow that place. So as you're slowly circling around with your nose, can you track what happens at that point on the top of your head? When does the top of your head move backwards? Can you sense when the top of your head moves forwards? And how easy or not is it to sense the top of your head while you're circling your nose? And as you begin to sense the top of your head, does that interfere with this circling of your nose? So can you begin to sense that when the top of your head goes back, what hour is your nose at on its clock? And when the top of your head comes forward, what hour is your nose at? And how elusive or not is this? How easy or not is this to sense? Okay, so leave that for a moment. And then we'll do the same action, but we'll use the top of your head. So maybe you can imagine that there's a clock on the ceiling. And when you move the top of your head backwards, that's towards 12 o'clock. And then when you move the top of your head to the right, that's towards 3 o'clock. As the top of your head comes forward towards 6. And then when the top of your head goes to the left, that's towards 9. So slowly begin to circle around this head clock. And again, doesn't need to be a very big movement. And just notice which hours are a little more clear, which hours are less clear. And then as you're circling with the top of your head, are you able to sense what you're doing with your nose? So can you sense how your nose is, or the path that your nose is taking through space? And when is it clear and when is it confusing? All right, have a rest for a minute. And so, as I was saying before, there's no right or wrong, and you don't need to achieve anything in particular. It's more the process and inviting yourself to pay attention to see if you can sense what it is that you're doing. With that idea that if you can refine and have a clear idea of how you're using yourself, then you can do what you want. Okay, so please come back to that same position, so your hands on your knees. You slowly arch gently the lower part of your back. And let's just begin to explore an arc of the head clock. So if you can take your head, the top of your head towards 12 o'clock and then towards 3 o'clock. And just go back and forth between this arc, between 12 and 3. Okay, so the top of your head will move backwards and then it will move forwards to the right. And once you've established this arc that your head is making, the top of your head is making through space, can you sense the arc that your nose is making? Can you decipher which hours your nose is moving between? And then leave that. And then with your nose, can you begin to go between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock with your nose? So you're just slowly and gently exploring this arc. And as you're doing that with your nose, is it possible to sense the arc that the top of your head is making through space? So which hours is the top of your head moving between? How clear, how confusing is it? Okay. And then you can continue with your nose and begin to explore between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock on your nose clock. And once again, once you've got that a little more clear, can you sense what you're doing with the top of your head? So can you sense when your nose is at 6 o'clock that the top of your head comes forward? And then as your nose goes to 9 o'clock, the top of your head moves backwards and to the left. And so then maybe shift so that you're thinking about your head clock, and take your head clock between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So the top of your head goes back and then forward and to the left. And as you're slowly establishing that arc, can you decide or decipher whether your nose is doing the same hours at the same time? So when your head goes between 6 and 9, is your nose also going between 6 and 9? Or not? Okay, let it go for a moment. Have a pause. Please come back to sitting at the front of your chair with your feet flat and your hands on your knees. And this time, can you begin to take your nose in a counterclockwise direction? So can you begin to go anti-clockwise so that your nose lifts to 12 o'clock, then it moves to the left to 9 o'clock and then down to 6 o'clock. Just slowly, gently. And once again, just sensing which hours are more clear, which are less clear. Which parts of your clock are more circular or less circular. And can you move in a way that your jaw's soft? The muscles around your eyes aren't working too much, they're soft. So you're bringing to this movement the smallest amount of effort that you can. And as you're circling in a counterclockwise direction, can you sense what you're doing with the top of your head? So when does the top of your head come forward? What hour is your nose at? When the top of your head goes to the right, where is your nose? And if you like, you can get a finger and place a finger on the top of your head. And maybe a couple of times, slowly, gently circle counterclockwise with your nose clock. And just sense, what is the top of your head doing? And by having your finger there, does that help clarify what you're doing with the top of your head? Or maybe you could place your finger on your nose and a couple of times circle counterclockwise with your head, so that you take the top of your head backwards and then to the right and then forward. And as you're circling with your head clock with your finger on your nose, does that help track what the path that your nose is making through space? Okay. Pause for a moment, let it go. Okay, come to sitting on the front of your chair once again with your hands on your knees. And slowly, gently begin to move your nose in a clockwise direction around your nose clock. And your hands can be on your knees now if you like. And just, once you've established moving in that, around that clock, once again, can you sense what the top of your head is doing? And is that getting any easier to sense both these clocks at the same time? So maybe you could shuttle your attention so that you go once around with your nose clock, and then maybe once around with your head clock, And just see if you can begin to spread your attention so that you can sense both these clocks at the same time. And just notice something might come into the foreground, maybe one clock might come a little bit more into the foreground of your attention. Or you might find it easier just to shuttle between the two clocks. But see if you can find a way of being able to spread your attention so that you can keep both these clocks in the background. Okay. Okay, let it go. Let it go. Okay. So then come to the front of your chair once again, with your hands on your knees. And go back to that very beginning movement of just gently arching the low part of your back. And just notice, how does that compare? And is that any different? And even if you weren't able to decipher these two clocks at the same time, has the process of exploring that movement, has that influenced this action at all? Is that any easier? Or maybe there's less effort? Maybe there's a different quality with how you tilt your spine forward now. So once again, just sense, how do you initiate this action now? Of arching your lower back. And is it any easier now to keep the back of your neck a little more quiet? Is it any easier for your whole spine to tilt forward? Or not? And then can you begin to revisit that pendulum movement? So you just slowly begin to tilt your whole spine a little to the left and a little to the right. And just notice, how does that compare to the beginning? Is that different in any way? Do you have a clearer sense of how you're shifting your weight underneath your sit bones? Is it any easier to keep your spine like a stick? And then the next time you're to the left, can you begin to move your whole spine forward, and a few times begin to revisit making a cone with your whole spine. And just once again, just sense, is that different from the first time that you explored that movement? Does it feel any easier to do? Maybe it has a different quality to it. And then a couple of times you could reverse that direction. And just sensing, how do you shift your weight on the chair now? Is it any easier to sense what's happening underneath your feet? And how easy or not is it now to sense the top of your head? So as you're making this cone shape with your spine, is it easier to sense the circle that the top of your head is making through space? Okay. And then leave that and just have a final rest in sitting. And just take a moment to sense, what is your sitting like now? So come to the front of your chair once again. And just take a moment to sense, if you had more weight under one sit bone, is it still the same case? Or has that evened out a little bit? Or maybe there's more weight under the other sit bone. Is it different? And how do your feet support you now in sitting? And then take a moment to sense how you're stacked. Take a moment to sense how you're carrying your chest over your pelvis. And is that any different to the beginning? And how do you carry your head? Are you any more stacked or not? What does sitting feel like now? And then just take a moment to sense, how does your breath move you now? Sense which directions you're moving with your breath and how that compares to the beginning. Whether your breath moves you in more directions or not. Okay, and then leave it alone. And so that gives you a bit of a taste of an awareness through movement class. And so yeah, now we'll take questions.